Hey everyone, this is Connor. Before we get started, I just want to encourage you to check out our Patreon, patreon.com/Podside Picnic. If you become a patron, you'll get access to multiple exclusive episodes every month. And you can also join our patrons-only Discord chat, where Pete and I talk informally with the Podside Picnic community. So if you like the show, go ahead and check us out at patreon.com/Podside Picnic. Thanks.
What are you waiting for? Breakfast in bed? Another glorious day in the Corps. Day in the Marine Corps is like a day on the farm. Every meal's a banquet. Every paycheck a fortune. Every formation a parade. I love the Corps.
Man, this floor is freezing.
What do you want me to do? Fetch your slippers for you?
Gee, would you, sir? I'd like that.
Look into my eye.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Podside Picnic. Today is a very special episode for us because we've got two things to be excited about here. The first is that we're going to be talking about Aliens. And if you haven't seen Aliens, hit stop and go watch it. I'm embarrassed for you. Secondly, we've got Will Menaker here as a guest with us. Will Menaker is one of the hosts of Chapo Trap House. It is a leftist comedy and politics podcast that I listen to twice a week. And, honestly, you should go listen to that, too, before you listen to this episode as well.
Go back and listen to all 300 episodes now.
Yeah.
You will develop a genius brain if you do so.
Boys, it's great to be here. We're on an express elevator to hell right now.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. This kind of happened serendipitously because I noticed you faving my tweets about Aliens, and I was like, I know Will loves this movie because you've posted like GIFs of Hudson and other characters, and I'm like, yeah, this is perfect. So thanks so much for coming on. On that note, I guess I'm really curious, when did you first see this movie, and how did it become important to you, and how has it stayed important?
First of all, thanks for having me on. Unlike my podcast, where everything I do, I'm mostly just winging it like everyone else is, coming on to talk about aliens, sci-fi, and sort of 80s action movies in general is one of the only things I am actually qualified to do. So it's good to share, an informed opinion for once. But I mean, this is a movie, I saw when I was a kid, probably in junior high school, and immediately became obsessed with the colonial Marines and all of sort of cool military science fiction style of this movie that I'm sure we can go on to talk about how widely influential that was. But yeah, this is just a movie I saw when I was a kid and has stayed with me ever since. I've seen it, dozens of times probably. It still holds up. It's still good. It's one of the best sequels of all time. That's where it was for me.
Okay, well, sorry, Will, I'm one of those people that can't just watch a movie. Like, analysis has ruined everything for me. So immediately I watch Aliens and I pull my scalpel out. And the first thing I do is I'm very interested in the subgenre here. Connor seems to feel that dividing things up into genres is crap, but what would you say this film was if you had to throw it in a category?
Like, sci-fi action, military science fiction, making the transition from the first movie, sci-fi horror, to a sci-fi action hybrid.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm excited because that's my take too. But when you go from Alien to Aliens, you're basically switching subgenres. Is that a thing for this particular writer, or is it? Because I can't think of another person who can do this besides Cameron.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think Dan O'Bannon was the guy who wrote Alien, and he wasn't involved in this, so. Yeah, this is one of the better examples of, someone new taking the source material and sort of expanding the universe and style of it in a way that still feels completely coherent with the original film. Despite, like you said, having a kind of subgenre shift in the sequel to like the sort of the big action blockbuster where, it's the perfect title, Alien to Aliens. It says it all. It's like you saw the first one. There's only one of them. goddamn, that was scary. Imagine if there's lots of them.
Right. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things that drive that shift and become apparent in the story. Then also allow you to sort of dig into the historical moment. One of those, of course, is we actually did a exclusive episode about aliens. We have picked that movie apart recently.
The singular, you mean?
Oh, the first one, you mean?
The first one, yeah.
Yeah.
And we sort of dug into that as a movie about labor relations because, of course,
absolutely.
They're blue collar workers who don't want to be in the situation rather than brave explorers, and they get hosed by their corporation, right? And we located that movie in 1979, kind of right at the very end of the heyday of American labor.
Yeah, absolutely. Like right for the dawn of the Reagan era, and sort of introducing like the sort of post 70s, like after all the good times and good vibrations and radical possibilities of the 70s had sort of petered out. And Alien in particular, like in Ridley Scott and Blade Runner really established this kind of vision of the future that was dingy and kind of run down and looked physical and sort of like our own timeline. There was no sort of gleaming, sleek vision of the future anymore. And Cameron took that as well. And I think to understand Aliens, you really have to place it in the context of the 80s action genre in general, these sort of quasi-fascist movies of the Reagan era that all either consciously or not were attempting to deal with getting over Vietnam and winning again. And like a proto Make America Great Again kind of message that, all that shit in the 60s and 70s that like we're the bad guys. Like, no, we're bringing America back with like big muscles, big guns, and lots of homoeroticism. And Aliens is a movie that not so subtly attacks all of the macho sort of right-wing content of the 80s action military movies, but does it in a way that it's still a perfect example of the genre. Like, it's not just like a self-aware subversive attack on a genre. Like, it's a great example of it in that it's also a really fun, awesome action movie.
So it's kind of a Verhoeven.
Yeah, it's not, I would say like, Cameron is obviously not as like savagely self-aware and political as Verhoeven is, but it's unmistakable that Aliens is a movie that shows you all of this cool military technology and makes you love it. And I still do. It's like one of the most memorable things about the movie, the kind of the weapons and the spaceships, and shows you all these macho guys, perhaps best portrayed by Bill Paxton's character Hudson. The just dumb jarhead who's just like, show me something to shoot. Like, we don't give a shit about these aliens. Fuck them. And then like in a kind of Vietnam allegory, just throws them into the meat grinder, and like none of their training or technology matters for shit. And they just get owned and annihilated by a force completely beyond their control.
I think what you said, Will, about this inhabiting the 80s action hero genre, but also subverting it, is really interesting. And I hadn't fully considered that. What I was going to ask you was, what's so interesting is the transformation of Ripley between these two films. Obviously, we already established that in the first one, Ripley, I think I said in the episode where we dissected Alien, she's kind of like the assistant manager of the grocery store. Like, she's like a barely managerial level blue collar worker who's forced to be heroic by circumstances, very reluctantly. And then in this one, she's also being drawn back into this pretty much kicking and screaming through sort of a complicated plot where, of course, the corporation blames her and she's being victimized for having done the right thing and all this stuff. And she gets dragged back into the situation where she has to confront the xenomorphs once again. But what I do think is interesting is that as this takes us several years later into the beginning of the neoliberal era and the heart of the Reagan era, it's like, well, yes, all that is very astutely done, but at the same time, Ripley is going from being a pretty believable, real person you might meet to she does by the end become this action hero badass, right?
Oh yeah, she definitely, goes full Rambo by the end of the movie, and it is. The change in Ripley like represents the change in these subgenres, going from the horror movie heroine, the prototypical last woman, to an action hero. And I think I remember, I don't know if you guys touched on this, but I think Dan O'Bannon originally wrote the character Ripley as a man, and they were originally going to cast the lead as a man, but I forget, for some reason they were just like, oh, like, why don't we just make Ripley a woman, and here's Sigourney Weaver.
And I can assume the 2 crying scenes they shoehorned in when they changed the gender.
Right, yeah.
Well, and Pete and I still disagree about what the crying means. But I mean, I do think what's interesting is that I agree with you that does a great job subverting this and subverting the genre, commenting not only on Vietnam, but on, I would say, probably American involvement in Latin America in the 80s, which, hey, that's not relevant anymore. Thank God we got over that.
Good thing that's all being taken care of. We don't have that's all over. We don't have to worry about that anymore.
Yeah,
Right.
well, the timing on this is kind of perfect, Will, because like within the past month, you've done 2 episodes talking about Guatemala, just sort of randomly, right? But this really felt like Weyland-Yutani was United Fruit, and they set up a scenario in which the Marines would have to show up and get them a sample of these aliens. Was that your read, or was it just like a happy coincidence?
I mean, it's unmistakable that in the first 2 movies, like the bad guys of those movies is the corporation, and it's like a very clear, like they're called the Colonial Marines, right? Like, so they're being used in ways not too different than as Smedley Butler called them, gangsters for capitalism. Like the xenomorphs, the aliens have no morality to them. They're just scary, but they just do what they do. Like, the evil is in Aliens, the yuppie asshole Burke, played by Paul Reiser, who lies to everyone and gets them killed because the evil corporation wants to use them as weapons, as biological weapons.
And as someone in high school at that time, the most surreal thing about this movie was watching it and then turning around and watching that stupid sitcom Mad About You that he was in.
Yeah, that was because, I remember watching Mad About You, and Paul Reiser in movies and Mad About You is the prototypical, he's always the nice guy. And then when you see him in Aliens as this cowardly, sniveling rat, it's a nice contrast.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the thing that I really struggle with, something I've thought about a lot and actually one reason that we're doing this podcast is I'm trying to change my relationship to genre fiction broadly across media. And this seemed like a cool way to sort of do it systematically. And I think that I brought up the Ripley thing just because I struggle with, what are you really instantiating when you have a character, whether they're resistant to it or not, that becomes so exceptional and they become such a supreme badass, especially when you're lifting them up out of sort of resolute ordinariness in Alien. And that movie feels so distant in time and space precisely because it's one of the last majorly successful Hollywood movies that really respects, in a kind of effortless way, ordinary workers. And, I just wonder, like, if you could break down even a little bit more for us, like, if you think this film succeeds in not being reactionary even though it creates that exceptional individual that we're so wary of, and do you think that works, or how do you think it works?
I mean, it's obviously it's a giant Hollywood action movie, so I wouldn't say it is. I would say compared to other similar films, it certainly succeeds more than they do in not being reactionary. But, it's sort of like the question, like, are the Alien movies feminist because they have a female lead and that, like, she's a strong badass who, like, shows the guys what's what in Aliens? That's certainly there. I would say the movie is not reactionary in that I think it does consciously subvert all of the, macho Reagan era action movies tropes, but I don't think like as such, or just like it's a, left-wing text. However, considering James Cameron would later on to go on to do Avatar, another military sci-fi movie that explicitly makes the point that colonial troops and soldiers are the oppressors and should be killed by indigenous peoples. I don't know. James Cameron, maybe he's woke. Maybe he's he's discovered something at the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, I don't really feel the need to essentialize this or anything else. Like, I think that for my mind, Aliens is a pretty strongly anti-imperialist film. And I think there are also lots of great little touches about that. Because again, even in the brief scenes where you first meet the colonial Marines and they're getting out of cryostasis and they're just bantering and being themselves before they even go into combat, which is a pretty brief part of the film, but very memorable just because it's so well written.
Extremely memorable. I remember when I was a kid, that was like my favorite part of the movie is the scene where they get up and then you meet Sergeant Apone. I love the Corps. Every day in the Corps is like a day on the farm. Every formation, a parade. Every meal, a banquet. And also, can I get an RIP to Sergeant Apone and Private Hudson? Al Matthews, the actor who played Apone, died this year. And then Bill Paxton, tragically, even before him. Al Matthews left out of the Oscars in memoriam reel last night.
Really?
So
that is brutal. Oh man.
Yeah, that's not
right. He deserves better because that is like Apone, especially for a guy who dies like basically at the end of the first act, like dies pretty quickly into the movie.
He dies pretty quick.
Yeah,
he's the grizzled sergeant who's their, the leader in the field, and then when the first battle with the aliens just gets like annihilated right away, and that's when okay, they're really in deep shit.
And it's a Vietnam thing. It's like the reason he gets annihilated is because he follows the shitty, stupid orders.
The awful,
officer.
the officer who's always in like the rear.
Yeah, they have like a very recognizable yuppie ROTC leader for this combat mission, and all the enlisted troops are like grizzled and cynical. And I brought it up partly to talk about like their status as workers is made very clear because I think one of the first things that one of them says getting out of the cryo tanks is, "I hate this job." Yeah. Okay, this is a job. We're not action heroes. We're doing our job, man.
I'd say in any other good military movie, that guy gets fragged.
Yeah.
yeah. No, and then in the scene where their first encounter with the aliens, where like half of them die, it's the stupid lieutenant who fucking panics and doesn't know what to do, and it's Ripley who has to save everyone. Just and takes over and drives that fucking cool ass tank into the reactor or wherever they are.
And I thought that was such great writing because it's a great badass moment and a turning point for her as a character across the different movies. But it's also just like it's so rooted in her ordinary competency as a person. It's like she knows how to drive the equipment. She understands the need to get out of there. She understands how straightforward the situation is. It's not like the James Cameron produced movie we just reviewed, Alita Battle Angel, where it's not that Ripley suddenly discovers she knows extreme martial arts that no one else knows. It's like, no, it's that she can drive this vehicle and she knows the situation, and that's all she has to understand. You know?
I love being on this podcast with you, Connor, because this is a moment of divergence. This is where I disagree because I have a crazy theory that wraps all of this up. So, Will, were you ever a pen and paper or a tabletop gamer?
I'm slowly becoming one later in life, but not as such as it was a child.
Fair enough. Well, there's a number of games like Torg or GURPS where the idea is that different characters from different backgrounds are subject to different world laws. Like you might be from a horror realm, and that means that you will die as soon as you do something that you can be judged by an Old Testament God, because like those are the rules we have set up in horror movies, or, that sort of thing. And this movie seems to have competing narratives like that. Like the Marines, when they walk in, they think they're in Starship Troopers and they act like it. And the world treats them like that until they land into aliens horror land, where things have a completely different set of rules and they get subsumed by it.
Yeah. And I think that's the, setting up all of their both their military technology and their sort of, macho, dumb guy energy. Like they land in a narrative that is governed by different laws and like going against, all of the like, the commando style action movie where it's like an American or in, Arnold's case, an Austrian bodybuilder who's just like, swole as hell, just on steroids, huge guns, and like, no number of, mostly brown men in uniform can really just even hit him with one bullet. And like all he just takes is just him with a machine gun just mowing them down. And in this movie, it's like, like the xenomorphs are on another level. Like it just that feeling of like you're fucked. Like there's no planning, no technology, no training that's going to get you out of this or save you from this situation. Like none of it means shit.
Yeah, until Ripley gets attached to that child and goes like full Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
Like it almost seems like it's 3 movies sandwiched together to me.
I don't disagree with you there, Pete. I almost make a very similar but almost inverted move where instead of trying to tease out the different genres and set them in opposition to each other in this movie, I just think this movie does a really impressive job blending them all together at once and kind of almost inhabiting its own genre. Like the more that I think about this movie, the less I'm actually apt to compare it to other things. Although Will can correct me because I haven't gone back and watched like Terminator 2 recently. So maybe I'm overestimating its uniqueness, but man, I certainly wish more blockbusters were trying to imitate this movie because it's a worthier thing to inherit the legacy of than so much else. But I mean, yeah. I
mean, it seems like, talk about like a bygone era when like this was a huge R-rated like action movie that a studio spent a shitload of money on, which they really just don't do anymore.
Yeah, it's true. I think the last comparable like R-rated action epic that I can remember that was pretty good was Logan, and that was solid, I thought. But yeah, no, it's definitely a bygone era. I mean, I remember reading about the making of this movie, and it was like reading about a different planet because I think, if I'm not getting this wrong, I think they were filming in the UK, and they had a very strong union crew of Brits who Cameron clashed with because he was used to he really wanted to ask a lot of the crew. He's used to American standards.
Yeah, he's a tyrant and an auteur.
Right. And actually, at some point when they were filming, he tried to make everyone watch Terminator 2 because he'd already done that just to prove to them that he could do it. And the British crew was like, fuck off. Which I think is funny.
He did make everybody on the cast read Starship Troopers.
Wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, I mean, like when you started talking about it as that sort of film, it's like the bells start going off. It's like absolutely as intended.
Huh. Yeah, the military stuff. And, obviously he's not doing what Verhoeven's doing in Starship Troopers. Like he's giving you a movie that is pretty straight up. Like I don't think there's like any kind of like the double narrative or like double meaning that Verhoeven's doing. He's giving you a straightforward, crowd pleasing action movie. But I think one, like I mentioned, it does is like not subtle and like, but not like beating over the head with like how it is going against type for the like Reagan era action movie.
Right. And I think what's interesting is that this movie has had a profound cultural influence. And I think one of the most overt ones it's had is not so much on other movies as on video games. Because
oh my God, yeah. Like every like Halo and pretty much like every first person shooter video game that came out after this is in one way or another like borrowing from this movie.
It is even down to individual sequences. Like I feel like almost every, like you said, every sci-fi inflected first person shooter I've ever played has been influenced by the scene in Aliens when they first get to the abandoned colony that's been attacked by xenomorphs, and it's like damaged laboratory.
Yeah.
They work their way through it very linearly, and there's a bunch of damage and stuff,
Yeah, and then like of course with the Queen alien, like the boss fight.
That's one of cinema's great.
That goes on like when you think it's done, there's actually like no, like there's another tier to the boss fight. The boss takes a different shape and comes at you a different way.
Yeah.
But yeah, like definitely like Halo for sure. Like that, yeah. That the colonial marine aesthetic has had a very very long afterlife from this movie, and obviously as you said, you just saw what is it, Alita. Cameron, he's a canny guy. He borrows from like a lot of sources, like, Harlan Ellison famously for Terminator, which I think he had to give credit to like after the movie came out because Harlan was going to sue him. But, he stole a lot of that look from manga and anime, but he was the first one to really like do it in live action in a big American movie. And yeah, it has created a very, very long template of, a look for this kind of thing.
Yeah. And Gosh, if only people had internalized a little bit more the anti-imperialism of it. Think of what might have been in American mass culture, but here we are.
Well, we have to wait for Avatar and then all of the Avatar sequels. We didn't learn the lesson of Avatar, which is against U.S. imperialism and the war machine. So we're gonna have to watch 3 or 4 more Avatar movies until we get the point.
Yeah, well, I wish you would hurry up.
And hands off Venezuela.
Yeah,
I was gonna say that seems like a harsh punishment, but if that's what's gonna do it,
yeah. And that was the other disappointing thing. Avatar, all of the military technology and look was very cool. But the Na'vi suck shit. Everything about the way they look and their culture is annoying and stupid and offensive, unlike our beautiful, beautiful xenomorph and their perfect society.
Right. Well, also, the difference in Cameron, depicting these cynical, wry, extremely practical and self-interested, but fundamentally very sympathetic colonial Marines, for instance, or depicting Ripley, and the way that Cameron depicts the good guys in Alita Battle Angel, which again, I don't think you've seen, but it is so cloying, so treacly. They don't have flaws. I mean, again, it's a movie that's aimed at a younger audience, granted, but it's still just at what point is it inflating your own ego and being isolated and not hearing no enough that you start to think that to be a good guy, to be a protagonist, you must have 0 flaws and you must constantly beat viewers over the head with how great you are. Because that seems to have really happened to Cameron later on in life.
Jesus, you're making me angry about that movie just talking about it, man. Hey, could we talk about something a little crazy here? I have a theory about the Aliens movies that is probably not true, and I wanted to share it and, get Will's reaction and to see if he has any of his own pet crazy theories about films like this.
Okay, go for it. Lay it on me.
So when the first 3 movies came out, I was writing basically an exegesis of Beowulf, the old whatever you want to call it, saga. And the first Middle English literature that we have. Yeah, exactly. And it's divided into roughly 3 pieces, which is Beowulf fights Grendel, Beowulf fights Grendel's mother, and Beowulf fights the dragon and sacrifices himself to save everybody. And I was reading that and I watched Alien 3 and I'm like, holy crap, the first 3 movies of Aliens is Beowulf. It follows the same narrative structure.
That scans to me. Obviously the queen is the mother, the Grendel's mother. It certainly lines up. However, my only critique of it is I am going to slightly resist against any reading of these movies in which Alien 3 is good at all.
Well, and I was probably one of the few people who got angry for this reason that Alien 4 came out.
Alien 4 also sucks, but I think Alien Resurrection is a better movie than Alien 3.
Yep.
I'm going to put my marker down. It's written by Joss Whedon, so it's, of course, insufferable. But it's got a great cast, and there's a couple of very good scenes in Alien 4.
Yeah. Well, I loved her shooting hoops, and there was a lot of great murder. I'll give you that.
There's some very good gore in it. And there's some very weird, Brad Dourif moments and just, very, very odd things that, you sort of wonder how that ended up in a movie that presumably someone has spent tens of millions of dollars on. Whereas Alien 3, I know there's all these different cuts of it out there. It's really hard for me to imagine there's a cut of this movie where it isn't just 2 hours of just sweaty men in dark tunnels, because that's basically all that's going on there.
I think the ideal cut of Aliens 3 would be the opening credits and the closing credits. Just take a hatchet to everything in the middle.
Now, I know you guys just did an episode on Neuromancer. Are you aware that the original Alien 3 screenplay was written by William Gibson and was never made? Not. There is a draft of Alien 3. You can read William Gibson's screenplay of it. I'll send you guys a link of it. And it's actually just been adapted into like a comic book series. Like someone has taken the William Gibson screenplay and illustrated it. Like to just, show what the movie kind of guess would have been like.
Wow, Pete, I think we have to cover this.
Yeah, we do have to cover this.
Wow.
Can we
it begins with the Sulaco passing through some territory of space that's like actually controlled by like future space communists. So there is an opposing sphere of power in this universe that is like, not the corporation, but they're like, neo-Marxists or something.
That sounds really cool. Wow.
Yeah, like the Bernie Nebula. I'm all about it.
Yeah.
I would like to cover that, but I am going to beg you, Connor, can we not do 3 and 4?
Yeah, no, we're going to step away from aliens with movies, but I'm really interested in the comics. Yeah.
If you're, exactly. If you're doing a show about like, what is the necessary text of genre, in 20th century America, Alien and Aliens are in there. Alien 3 and 4 superfluous.
Yeah. What do you guys think about Alien versus Predator?
The movie was dog shit. I mean, it was terrible.
Yeah,
it was 13. I mean, come on, like from my childhood, Alien and Predator, two of my favorite movies of all time. I think even Predator 2 very underrated with Danny Glover and Gary Busey, and Bill Paxton also in Predator 2. These are the best monsters of my childhood, like the most badass movie villains. And you put them together in a movie and it's PG-13, faux out of here. Terrible.
Well, and I don't want to be this guy, but like the Dark Horse comics, I really enjoyed those for years. And then those movies came out and they were just steaming turds.
So bad.
Man,
and not canon.
Not canon. I'm glad that the Predator came up though, because of course Predator is sort of a perfect contrast to this, where the Green Berets,
like a post-Vietnam narrative of giant muscle military men encountering something alien and being destroyed by it.
Right.
Yep. What's weird about the difference is like when you're dealing with Predator, there's a certain amount of sort of Old Testament who's committing a crime thing going on, because you have to be holding a weapon for the Predator to go after you.
That's true.
But aliens, they don't care. Like they'll latch babies to the wall. They'll kill anybody.
Yeah, I mean they're like just this biological force that just cannot be stopped. It's like the perfect, like it's like the alien, the xenomorph is like anti-life, because to like extend their life cycle, they have to replace a host, famously by bursting out of their stomach and chest.
Yeah, and I love the sort of genesis of that mechanic, which we talked about in our Alien episode, which is like very Dan O'Bannon, I forget who he was writing the script with, but like they were apparently puzzling for a long time over, all right, at a very practical level, we have to get the alien on board the ship, and it probably shouldn't just be snuck on while they weren't looking. And and I guess Dan O'Bannon was like, had like a he was out drinking or whatever, and he had just like a moment where he was like, oh, it should fuck one of them. And he told
Dan O'Bannon's great. He wrote Alien because, like, previous to that, he had written, starred in, and done all the special effects for John Carpenter's first movie, Dark Star, which is a very good movie. It very interesting. Like one of the special effects in that, and if you watch it, like they do get an alien on board their spaceship, and it sort of almost follows like what he would do in Alien, in that it's like there's a guy, a lot of the movie is this guy chasing it around like ducks and sort of crawling through the recesses of this spaceship, except like the budget was so low that the alien was literally just like a beach ball bouncing up and down. Like it's very, very budget, but some of Dark Star is very cool, but it's mostly kind of a kind of heavy metal style, kind of stoner comedy. It's like sort of they tried to do kind of sci-fi comedy, which is like, Dark Star is interesting. It's worth watching, but not entirely successful. And it certainly wasn't, in theaters. No one really got it. And Dan O'Bannon famously said of then going to work on Alien, well, if I can't make them laugh, I'm going to try to make them scream, and just going full horror.
And it really landed. And I'm glad you brought up Carpenter, because like when we were thinking about Cameron's recent work, we were talking about how, and I don't know, like the arc of Carpenter, of course, is still alive and still works on various things. He did have one of my favorite, to digress a little bit, one of my favorite recent quotes where someone asked him, are you going to direct like a bunch of more movies? Are you going to direct like The Thing too? And he was like, well, if someone wants to give me money, maybe, but you got to realize there's a lot of video games I want to play and a lot of NBA games on TV.
Yeah, Carpenter is the best. I remember reading something about how Guillermo del Toro like took him out to dinner or something, or was at a party with John Carpenter, and of course, being like Mr. Film Nerd, just wanted to wax on about how The Thing is his favorite movie, and it's like a masterpiece that, changed his life. And, what does it feel like to have, created such a masterpiece? And, Guillermo is absolutely right about that. But Carpenter, just basically kissing him off immediately, where he was just like, masterpiece? Like, no one saw that shit. Like, I didn't get paid any money for that masterpiece. Fuck it. I don't care.
Well, what was in the theater when The Thing was in the theaters, right? E.T.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I mean, and it's
God.
like that's what people wanted. We were in the middle of a recession. Nobody wanted to see this gloomy everybody dies bullshit. And like now here we are, and like you couldn't get me to watch E.T. at gunpoint. But I would watch The Thing again right now.
And that's exactly why the Cameron's arc, because of course Cameron has stayed in the game. Carpenter has too, to an extent, but it's like I see Carpenter as, and The Thing exactly is what you just said, the road not taken for blockbusters. If blockbusters, there's so many blockbusters now that could be so improved by just embracing the pulp and being more like a John Carpenter movie. I think a pretty good example of this in the Marvel universe was Thor Ragnarok, which is and I mean, gosh, if imagine if The Thing had won that duel with E.T. Again, that's another like branching fork in the road. If people had gotten the anti-imperialism and aliens, and they'd also gotten how much better The Thing was than E.T., woof.
This is what I'm going back in time to do. Baby Hitler is safe for now. I'm going back to the 80s to try to make sure American film culture, American movies and culture in general, follow the left-hand path.
You're going to assassinate E.T., huh?
Yeah. No, those are not walkie-talkies. Those are guns, and they're going to air hole his bitch ass.
Imagine a xenomorph just like tearing E.T. apart. That's
wild to think about. I would like, yes, internet deviant artists, get to work on that right now. I'm sure there are plenty of cartoons already of similar thematic content.
Will, we have a gimmick that we just made up this weekend where I make book recommendations for guests of the show. Honestly, I make book recommendations to anybody who comes within 20 yards of me, so it's not a big shot. May I recommend a book to you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. There's an author named Tim Powers, and Tim Powers was basically Philip K. Dick's acolyte.
Mm.
And
I haven't read him.
Okay, well, I think you'd enjoy him. He wrote a book called Declare, which is a lot about like the Cold War era spy stuff going on, particularly like the whole British spy group getting turned and actually working for the Soviet Union and that sort of thing. And his theory in this book is that that
actually happened, right?
Oh yeah.
Like no, MI6, like the KGB got way. That was all like the Le Carré stuff, but like
the Cambridge Five, Kim Philby, yeah,
KGB got real deep into British intelligence.
Kim Philby's one of the major characters in this book, and the ultimate idea is all of this stuff going on between the West and the East that looks insane at first blush is actually explainable by supernatural activity happening sort of just under the radar.
Okay, what's it called?
Declare.
Declare. Okay. All right. I will put that in the queue.
All right. Yeah, I mean, let Connor know if you liked it, because that'll be points on the board for me.
Pete has, I mean, this is why we do this podcast. Pete has an unbelievable knowledge of sci-fi novels. So I trust his opinion here. I want to ask you, Will, like, you did a great job breaking down Aliens. I mean, what other sci-fi, we already mentioned like Terminator 2, what other sci-fi, whether in book or movie or video game form, is really important to you?
Like I told you before we started, like I did just even before you guys asked me to come on, I did just of my own accord just rewatch Cameron's Terminator 1 and 2, which was still very fun and good to do. For me though, like I think like my favorite science fiction in movies and books like has that kind of, like you talked about Gibson, like that kind of cyberpunk feel. To me, like two of my favorite science fiction movies are the Ghost in the Shell movies, like the original and animated ones, the Mamoru Oshii versions, the original Ghost in the Shell, and then its sequel are both just beautiful and fascinating science fiction films that I always return to. And then as far as books go, like William Gibson, we mentioned Philip K. Dick. But also like the J.G. Ballard is also really, really, really big for me.
Cool. That's an interesting. So, I mean, one thing I want to do is Pete's making me read all of this hardcore sci-fi stuff, and I'm going to make him read some stuff that's considered more literary fiction but partakes of sci-fi. So Ballard should probably go on the list if we were to do one Ballard novel. Yeah.
If you don't, I would recommend that Ballard short stories. Actually, like if you get one of his short story collections, I would recommend starting with the stories because like those are the most traditionally science fiction. Those are like but of his novels, I would recommend. You could start with the first one, The Drowned World, which is, sort of a prescient look at climate apocalypse. But my favorite Ballard novel, hands down, is High Rise. And then you can watch the movie that Ben Wheatley did of it.
I'm nodding at you. I'm like the worst podcaster on earth. For God's sake, nobody can see me nod, but I totally agree.
You totally agree that you like Ballard?
Yeah.
Okay, you have read Ballard.
I haven't read High Rise, but I love Drowned World.
And then he did also another really good one called The Crystal World, which is about everything drying out and crystallizing on planet Earth. That one is, if you can find it, I don't know if it's in print anymore. You'll probably get a copy of it somewhere. The Crystal World, also extremely good.
Cool. We're definitely going to have to hit on Ballard at some point.
And you should definitely do a Ghost in the Shell episode, not the shitty, or maybe you could even do it where you like watch the original and then the god awful Scarlett Johansson movie, the live action version of it.
You know what? She got canceled for doing that, and she deserved to be. That's my stance.
for the wrong reason.
Well, I'll tell you, I think that's a good idea, and we'll let you know when we do. So if you're bored that day, we'd love to talk to you again.
Yeah. And like again, like I like cyborg narratives in science fiction, and like there's a scene in the first Terminator where I think there's Linda Hamilton and she lives with her roommate and she has like this dumb boyfriend and both of them get killed as fuck by the Arnold. But at one point, I forget, it's either Linda Hamilton or her roommate is wearing a T-shirt of the Jetsons. And I thought that was like definitely an intentional moment by Cameron that's contrasting the kind of very dark 80s world that he's inhabiting, of the cynical, frightening, paranoid future that the 1980s created, with the gleaming perfect image of what the 1980s would be like in a 1950s cartoon about the perfect American nuclear family in the future with flying cars and robot maids and shit like that. Whereas just Cameron's like, no, the robots is just like a gleaming metal skull just on fire coming at you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say this is another reminder that I really miss that clever James Cameron that used to be out there, and subtle. And not only that, but you talked about this earlier about the predictions that Cyberpunk made. And aside from some of the exact technological ones, Cyberpunk, the early Cyberpunk stuff, the genesis of it was pretty right about a lot of things, unfortunately. And
it's because William Gibson, when he wrote Neuromancer, I'm sure you guys said he didn't know anything about computers at all.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't like a, computer engineer. Like this was all, works of, imagination and like, so that's why something like cyberspace, imagining computer networks as being sort of visually mediated, was something he was able to come up with. It was because it was just purely an act of invention and sort of literary projection.
Right. And I think what fascinates me and what we're going to be unpacking across the whole length of this podcast, I'm sure, is how culturally, it's hard to say that we've really moved on in our storytelling from cyberpunk. And that's because cyberpunk dovetails with the neoliberal era that we unfortunately also cannot shake.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. One author who goes against that type in science fiction that I would also recommend is Kim Stanley Robinson. Have you read any of him?
Like Green Mars and those?
Yeah, the Mars trilogy.
I have not, but I guess Pete has.
Yeah, it's and honestly, anybody who tells you to read a book, we put it on the list. I am all about this. I'm not implying you're illiterate. You know what I mean? It's really cool that we're getting this branching out of the sci-fi, because like when we first started, I gave you like my 20 favorite, and that's not enough. We're not trying to turn you into a clone of me. What a nightmare that would be.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of started with Pete sending me a book list and being like, oh, man, I wonder if we should record some of this. And then immediately we realized we could probably only do 2 books a month. So if we wanted more content, we're going to have to do movies. But yeah, I mean, thanks for your contributions, Will. That was a really, really fun breakdown. And I don't know if Pete has anything else he wants to ask you, but I guess my last thing I would say is if there's anything else you want to talk about that's in the sci-fi realm at some point, we'd love to have you back on.
Well, I think by now pretty well established myself as a sci-fi nerd. So, I'll come back. I'll talk Star Trek. I'll talk anime. I'll talk anime. I'll talk, Star Trek Deep Space Nine. I'll talk anything that will get me ostracized from a cool society.
Right, well, you're always welcome at our lunch table, Will.
Pete, we're going to be sitting over here in the corner away from all the cool politics podcasters. So anytime you need a break,
Absolutely.
Oh, man. Well, Will, thanks so much, man. That was honestly really great, and I'm excited to put it up.
Oh, dude, anytime. I love to talk aliens.